Hi guys, welcome to New Ask Practical Science again. I'm Mr Ballaam, and today we're going to be looking at investigating the effect of exercise on breathing rates. So this practical is slightly different. You will actually be able to do this practical at home as it does require very little equipment. So the aims of this practical, we're going to be planning an investigation to what happens to your breathing rates during exercise. So with regards to working scientifically, we'll be planning the investigation, identifying the independent, dependent and control variables. We'll be forming a hypothesis using your own scientific knowledge. We'll be interpreting data to draw conclusions once we've done the experiment and got some results. And we'll also be able to present reasoned explanations to see if our predictions were correct or not. So for this practical, if you did want to take part at home, luckily the only piece of equipment that you will need is a timer, so you can just use the stopwatch function on your phone. Another thing to think about for this practical is the safety aspect. So obviously we are going to be measuring breathing rates, so if you do have trouble breathing, which it's not recommended that you probably do the experiment. Likewise, if you do have an inhaler, it is good to have it close by if you do need it. Another thing as well, obviously with any exercise, you do need to have enough room around you. You don't want to be banging into things, bashing your legs, tripping over things where you could seriously injure yourself. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of decide how we're going to plan the investigation, and we're going to write a method down. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a look at measuring changes in your breathing rate between when you are not exercising, so when you're just kind of standing still, and then we're going to look at your breathing rate when you are exercising with a couple of different activities. So I've got a few ideas for what I'm going to do for my two activities. Obviously you guys, if you are doing it at home, you can do your own different exercises to what I'm doing as well. So with that, once you have decided on the exercises that you do want to complete, you'll then need to write a method for how you're going to measure your breathing rate and how you're going to record your results as well. So a few things to consider for your method. It should be a clear, concise, step-by-step instructions of how you would complete this experiment. So you have to imagine that if you were given this experiment, your method, you were handing it to a friend or someone that didn't know the experiment, they would pick up this piece of paper and they'll be able to reproduce the exact same experiment that you have just done. Things to consider when writing your method are also those variables that we looked at the start of the year. So we have the independent variable, the dependent variable, and the control variable. So hopefully you can remember what the differences between those three variables are. So going through, the independent variable is the one that I changed. Independent starts with I, it means I'm going to change it. So what are we changing in this experiment? We'll be changing the type of exercise that we'll be doing. The next one we're going to look at is the dependent variable. So dependent variable is what you're going to be measuring. So what are we measuring in this experiment? We're looking at how your breathing rate changes. So it'll be the number of breaths per minute that we are measuring. So that will be the dependent variable. So the final one that we have is the controls. So these are things that we can control and things that we want to keep the same to ensure that the results that we get are accurate and fair. So for this example, hopefully you can think of a few things that you need to keep the same during the experiment. So for the control variables for my experiment here, what we are going to do, we're going to be keeping the same. We are going to be keeping the rest periods in between each exercise the same. As it would be unfair if I went straight from one exercise to another exercise without letting my breathing rate return to normal, otherwise the results that we get wouldn't be that accurate. Another thing we're going to keep the same is I'm going to be exercising for the same amount of time for each different exercise that I do. It would be very unfair if I was to do 15 seconds of star jumps compared to 5 minutes worth of jogging on the spot. I think that would make a huge difference to my breathing rate just because of the time difference. Whereas that's not what we're investigating. We're investigating the different exercises, not the length of exercises. If you can think of any more control variables, be sure to write them down in your method. Okay, so guys, I've got my method all completed now, and I've also drawn myself a results table. So hopefully your results table that you're going to draw will look something very similar to this. Obviously, if you are doing the experiment yourself with different exercises, you can do different exercises to what I've gone for here. I've gone for walking on the spot and then running on the spot, with the first one being standing still. So you can change those depending on what exercises you want to do. So in the left-hand column down here, we have the type of exercise. So that being what we're changing. So this is the independent variable coming down the left-hand side here. Whereas on the right-hand side, what we're measuring is the number of breaths per minute. So that's going to be the dependent variable, and that's going on the right-hand side down here. Okay guys, so clearly you can see I'm not quite in the right equipment to do this exercise now, so I better change quickly. there we are, ready to do some exercise now. So to help with this experiment, I'm going to bring in Mr Theodorakis. So Mr Theodorakis is going to be doing the timing for me. So he's going to time my minutes of exercise that I'm doing for each of my different exercises. So the exercise that I was going to do was standing still to start with, so I can get kind of a base reading of what my normal breathing rate is when I'm not doing any exercise. And then I have walking on the spot and then standing on the spot to see how that alters my breathing rate per minute. So we're going to start off with the first one of just me taking my breathing rate while standing still. So strap in for the most exciting minute of YouTube ever.
Ready, set, go. 3, 2, 1, stop.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mr Theodorakis. I counted there that I breathed 24 times. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over to my table and fill in that value. So number of breaths per minute there, we had 24. So obviously, if you're doing this experiment yourself, your value might be completely different to mine. It might be a bit less, it might be a bit more. That's absolutely fine. That's just your standard breathing rate per minute when you are standing still. So the next two that we're going to go through are walking on the spot and running on the spot. So I say if you wanted to do two different activities instead, so for example star jumps or press-ups or something, that's completely up to you, as long as you are accurately counting your breaths per minute. Okay, I know that minute was absolutely so exciting, so I have actually cut out the rest minute for you, but I have rested now for a minute, even though I was resting there already, just to make sure that my breathing rate is back down to normal. So for the second exercise, I'm going to be walking on the spot, and once again got Mr Theodorakis on the timer, timing me. So ready when you are, sir.
Okay, ready, set, go. 3, 2, 1, stop.
Whew, that was so tiring. So with that one, counting up my breaths on that one, I actually breathed 29 times on that one. So if I go back over to my table, and we can write in that we had 29 breaths in that 1 minute that Mr Theodorakis just timed me. So already we can see that we had 24 breaths per minute when I was standing still. However, when I started to walk on the spot, my breathing rate has increased by 5 and it has gone up to 29 breaths per minute. So before I do the next one, which is running on the spot, have a guess, see if you can predict how many breaths per minute I will breathe in the next exercise. So you can have a guess, so it'll be higher or lower than walking on the spot or still, and you can go even braver and see if you can just predict my number of breaths spot on. Okay, so guys, now I've done my first exercise, which was walking on the spot. So I do have a drink nearby to make sure that I stay hydrated, because we don't want to be getting dehydrated. So definitely do have a drink with you or after you've done maybe the harder experiment to make sure that you are staying hydrated. So obviously you don't want to go through the rest of your school day being dehydrated, as you won't be able to focus as much, and everyone does love some nice fresh water. So now I've done my first exercise, going to move on to my second exercise now, which is running on the spot. So once again, I've had my minutes interval in between my last exercise. My breathing rate has now gone back down to normal levels. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to be running on the spot for a minute. So Mr Theodorakis is going to be timing again. So whenever you are ready, sir.
Okay, ready, set, go. 3, 2, 1, stop.
That was a lot more tiring than walking on the spot. So for that one, I'm going to come over and fill in my results. So for that one, checking your guesses, my breathing rate increased to 38 breaths per minute. As you can hear, I'm out of breath now. That was a lot more hard work than the first two were here. Okay, so guys, so looking at my results here, we can now look at the different values that we got for my number of breaths per minute. So we started off with 24 when I was standing still. When I was walking on the spot, it increased to 29. So you would increase there of 5 breaths per minute increase. However, when we got to the third one at the bottom here, running on the spot, I breathed 38 times in the minute. So there's quite a big increase there from walking on the spot, and an even bigger increase from when I was standing still. So looking at that, obviously we look at some trends going through here. So the trend that we can see is that as the intensity of the exercise I was doing, so as the exercise got harder, because walking is a lot easier than running, so as the intensity of my workout got harder, the number of breaths I was taking per minute was also increasing. Okay, so overall we were looking at our observations and the relationship between your breathing rate and the intensity of the exercise that we were doing. So as you can see, as the intensity of the exercise increased, so did the number of breaths we were taking per minute was also increasing. So with that, you have to check your hypothesis, see if that matches what you originally thought. So if you do a bit of exercise anyway, you may have noticed that when you are exercising, your heart rate does increase, you breathe a lot more, you breathe a lot heavier, you start panting a bit when you do get quite hot when you're exercising. So with that, so write down whether you thought that your hypothesis and the results matched your hypothesis, or if it did go against it, why did you think that to start with, and how are the results that I've made, or the results that you've made at home, if you've done this practical yourself, how that they've disproved it, if you didn't think that the breathing rate would increase. So from our results, you can see that as the intensity of the exercise increased, so as I went from walking on the spot to running on the spot, the number of breaths that I took per minute increased. That was because my body was taking in more oxygen, because it needed more oxygen, so more reactants in that aerobic respiration word equation that we looked at last lesson. So looking at that, we need the oxygen as a reactant on one side to obviously release that energy on the other side. So that's why I was breathing in more, because my body needed more oxygen, because it needed to release more energy from the mitochondria in the cells. So today we've been looking at investigating the effect of exercise on breathing rates. So if you did your own experiment at home with your own exercises, fantastic, well done. Or if you did use my results, that's absolutely fine as well, because we've both been using the same scientific method, which you would have wrote out. So we'd have a lovely scientific method, step-by-step guide on how to complete this practical. So with that, we've also then analysed our results and looked for any trends and relationships between the data that we have. So I've been Mr Ballaam. Thank you very much for joining me. Look forward to seeing you again on New Ask Practical Science.